Should we start? Okay. Everyone wearing black t-shirts. Nice. Coordinated. This panel is very coordinated. So anyways, thanks a lot for being here. Thanks a lot to all the panelists who are here for joining and sharing their opinions. Thanks for everyone who took time from their busy schedules to be here and hear what we have to basically talk about in terms of account abstraction and chain abstraction. Before moving forward, I would just like to give every speaker like a minute or something to just introduce themselves, tell us what they're working on, and how what they're working on is relevant to what we have to talk about.
Sure. Is this working? Yeah. Cool. So my name's Kurt. I'm one of the co-founders for Rhinestone. We're building infrastructure for modular account abstraction. So in particular, we are an account vendor agnostic platform that allows developers to build modules, which are essentially self-contained smart contracts that can extend the feature set of essentially any account. So we solve the interoperability piece, we also solve the security piece, and then we provide a bunch of developer frameworks and I guess services to help developers build these modules, integrate them at the application layer, etc.
Yeah, my name is Ethan, although I go by the alias Tabasco online. I do developer relations at Particle. Essentially, kind of the core thing that we do at Particle is something called universal accounts. And so we kind of address chain abstraction through what we call the account layer, which means that we essentially build an account, specifically a smart account. We use ERC 437 right now. That gives you as a user the ability to basically have a single balance that you can use across the entire ecosystem. So for example, if I have 10 USDC on Polygon and 10 on Base and 10 on Arbitrum, I actually have 30 USDC that I can use collectively without bridging. And so it effectively eliminates the need to bridge or cognitively manage multiple different balances from the end user. They just have their balance, and wherever that's located doesn't matter, and they just use applications. And so that's what we build, and that's essentially how universal accounts work.
My name is, hello, is this one? Yeah. My name is Daniel. I'm CTO and co-founder of GasHawk, and GasHawk is helping every Ethereum user to save on transaction costs up to 95% by intelligently submitting this transaction at a low point in fees. And we are also helping institutions in intelligently submitting their transactions, like when it's regularly. And yeah, I'm here to discuss this. Great.
Cool. Hey. My name is Sung. I help out with product and marketing at Magic. To share a bit about Magic, Magic's mission's really focused on how do you really make on-chain experience simple for users, and we've started out with wallet abstraction, which has been really around how do you help users create non-custodial wallets with more familiar auth systems like email, SMS, social, and through that we've onboarded about 40 million on-chain and helped builders onboard more users, including the dApps like Polymarket, Helium, Immutable Passport, Wallet Connect, all the way to enterprise companies like Forbes, Mattel, Macy's, and Naver Financial. So that's really been the primary focus to date. And then of course, our next phase is, as we think hard about how do we constantly simplify this on-chain experience, and chain abstraction has been one of our next focus. And this week we launched something called Magic Passport, which is a first chain abstracted first wallet, which I'm happy to share more. And you can see it on our website, magic.link. But yeah, excited to speak about chain abstraction and account abstractions with the rest of the crew here.
Can you tell us more about what Magic Passport is and how does that work?
Yeah, so the idea is, the main problem is, if we interact with dApps across many chains, and what ended up happening is you have dust assets fragmented across many different chains. And if you think about having small amounts of assets in multiple chains, in multiple wallets, you can't really do much with it. But the whole idea is, what if you can aggregate and unify all of that into a single balance, into a single wallet, and use that across multiple chains? So all of a sudden, by aggregating this fragmentation, everyone becomes a lot powerful when interacting with dApps, and that's kind of the essence of the Magic Passport.
So do you if balances are spread across all these chains, do you pull them into one single chain, or you just abstract it with some UX magic?
Yeah. High level is they're all connected through smart contract accounts.
Got it.
And we basically help address, when the intents come, and then we aggregate them. Instead of aggregating to a single chain, they all still live on multiple chains, but they just all talk to each other and coordinate themselves through the smart contract account.
Got it. So let's take a step back. The name of the panel is From Abstracting Accounts to Abstracting Chains. We are at the Abstract conference. There's a lot of abstraction over here. But I just want to understand from the panel over here, how do you define account abstraction? How do you define chain abstraction? Where do the separation of concerns lie? And then how can we think more cleanly about these two things? Maybe Kurt, you can start.
Yeah, sure. In terms of defining account abstraction is about essentially migrating away from EOAs and allowing contract accounts to become essentially active accounts. So today at a protocol level, the only account in the EVM space that can trigger transactions is an externally owned account. Contract accounts can only trigger transactions in response to an EOA. And so ERC 437 is currently the bet that the ecosystem is making on allowing these smart accounts, which are essentially smart contracts, to initiate transactions without reliance on an EOA. So it introduces this concept of user operations, bundlers, paymasters, and an entry point. And a bundler is essentially an EOA, but it listens to essentially an open mempool where user operations are propagated, and then it takes those user operations, bundles them, and puts them on chain via the entry point. And then abstracting chains is, well, how do we go from making accounts super accessible for users by moving to contract accounts where you can get key rotation, etc., to abstracting away the protocol for users. And this has multiple different elements. I think a lot of what we've talked about to date around chain abstraction has been about balance abstraction and the ability to use tokens seamlessly across all these different chains. But in my mind, chain abstraction also includes key rotation. So if you're a user and you replace the signer on one chain, you would usually expect that main signer changes on all chains. And then it could also be that you're installing other kind of module functionality on your account. And a user would typically expect that no matter where they're using that account, they would have the same module setup. So module config is another thing that we talk about a lot internally at Rhinestone as being an element that we need to abstract chains away from.
You want to go?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. Actually, there was a panel at EVM Summit earlier today where we were asked this question, and we're talking to Arjun from Everclear and a few other guys about this. And I think that generally, there's sometimes some overlap where people think that account abstraction and chain abstraction are super closely related because they're both abstractions. But chain abstraction and account abstraction are very different scopes in terms of the problems that they're trying to solve and the degree of granularity that they actually refer to in their name. And so account abstraction, as Kurt mentioned, is just the enablement of user to use contracts as their means of interacting with the ecosystem, which of course enables many things as it relates to flexibility, like social recovery and gaseous transactions and batch transactions, and the usual pitches for why account abstraction is important. Chain abstraction is a much higher level idea than account abstraction. It is essentially the way that it's commonly defined is it's a user experience in which you don't need to basically do the manual things that are required to interact with multiple chains. So I don't need to go and bridge. I don't need to think about where my balances are and that they're located on multiple different chains. I just essentially use applications and that's done for me. And so chain abstraction is an addressal of multi-chain friction. Right? So you can say, okay, account abstraction is an addressal of the rigidity of EOAs, whereas chain abstraction is an addressal of the growing multi-chain landscape and the issues that are surrounding that, specifically the necessity to bridge, the necessity to think about, do I have enough balance on this chain to do the transaction, or do I need a bridge from some other chain that I have a balance on? That is a fundamental limitation in user experience and heightens a barrier to entry for end users. And so chain abstraction is solving that problem through the means of things like intents and other technologies. And the caveat here I want to make is that often account abstraction enables chain abstraction to some degree, but these are not account abstraction is not coupled with chain abstraction. So you can have chain abstraction without account abstraction, without things like ERC 437. This isn't a requirement, but it's very commonly used because you have things like batch transactions and so on that allows chain abstraction to be done more efficiently. And so, for example, at Particle with universal accounts, we also use ERC 437, albeit it's not a requirement. And so chain abstraction is related in that it's addressing a point of friction, but it is not technologically bound to account abstraction, and they have very different degrees of granularization.
Got it. So basically, just to summarize, account abstraction is moving away from the EOA signer. Chain abstraction is trying to solve two problems, which is letting the user tap into balances spread across multiple chains, and also making all the auth modules in sync across all the different chains. So if you look at the panel, like 3 of you basically work very closely to accounts, and then GasHawk works much more closely at the mempool level. I would like to understand how you guys are thinking about chain abstraction, account abstraction, and where do you guys come in?
Well, in general, I would say I couldn't agree more with Ethan's take on that. It's the separation, or we have to separate between the UX-facing changes that need to happen in order to make it available to the next billion, and the underlying infrastructural changes we need for that. And the chain abstraction is working on a much higher level in that regard. I would say that I would rather like to add a question to it, whether chain abstraction actually should mean for us not to limit ourselves to the Ethereum ecosystem, but maybe even abstract to chains like Bitcoin or Solana or everything else that you can derive from one identity a user has. That would be like real account abstraction for me.
Yeah, I guess just to address what you mentioned, I think chain abstraction as a definition is broad enough to where it absolutely can and I think will encompass non-EVM chains. Of course, the EVM ecosystem is the first place that we typically look to for abstraction because you have things like the proliferation of rollups and app chains, particularly within EVM. But I think that especially, we have a lot of users on Solana and on, MoveVM-based chains and whatnot, and more alt VMs that are emerging. And so I think that EVM is not the confines for chain abstraction. I think the ideal future is like, as you mentioned, say I have 10 USDC on Base, 10 on Polygon, and 10 on Arbitrum. I go and use that 30 to buy an NFT on Solana. But as a user, I don't even know that I'm using these different chains. I just know that, okay, I'm going and I'm doing this action and I have these funds and that's fulfilling the transaction. And so I think that is in scope of chain abstraction and will, especially in the long term, be a key functionality of how chain abstraction actually materializes.
I just want to highlight we are at DevCon. We don't talk about non-EVM chains over here. Okay, let's focus on account abstraction for a bit. So I think there are a couple of good properties that you achieve when you separate the EOA and use smart contract logic to actually verify how a particular transaction lands on chain. So you get things like batch transactions, which are very good for gas sponsorship, and you also get these on-chain policies where you can constrain certain types of behavior at the account level. I would like to get your thoughts on both of these properties that you achieve with account abstraction and maybe how those can be relevant for transitioning into the chain-free future that we want.
Yeah, so both are just a huge upgrade on UX. Gas abstraction is obvious. Batching means that you don't need to sign every interaction when you have a certain bundle of actions that are encompassed in whatever the interaction you're having with the application is. And then on-chain permissions or session keys, or as we like to call it, smart sessions, is another upgrade where essentially a user can define a scoped session key and essentially create an on-chain permission that can be delegated to a dApp, it can be delegated to some off-chain service. And so this can allow for async signing. So essentially a user can sign into a session and then have the dApp sign on their behalf. So the classic meme that went around X was someone playing a Web3 game and then every time they shot a bullet, that had to be recorded on chain. And so they're literally signing a MetaMask pop-up every time where, session keys can remove stuff like this. But session keys can be, far more powerful than that. You could imagine essentially creating an on-chain permission for maybe even an AI agent or some robo-advisor that's doing investing on your behalf. And so this starts to allow products that before required custody of funds no longer require that custody, and so you have dApps that can now start to compete with centralized exchanges when it comes to certain DeFi features, etc. So yeah, definitely like a huge upgrade. And like the cool thing about session keys as well is that it can help make the account very portable. And then I guess on the chain abstraction stuff, so for smart sessions in particular, you can actually create a multi-chain, multi-session like session key that can then be like surfaced to the user and signed by the user. And then this session can be chain agnostic as well. So that's a super cool feature.
All these look like UX improvements over the current account module. I also want to understand what are the security implications of whatever we are doing to improve UX to the end user. Is there an impact, and how you guys are thinking about it? Maybe Sung, we can start from your side.
Yeah, I'd say. So how do I put this? I think maybe just to share some context from how we've looking at kind of account abstraction, chain abstraction, and how people's understanding with security and that the sentiment of decentralization have been. I think I think maybe even before when account abstraction came about, I think there was a huge aversion to adopting any solution that requires a hybrid of on and off chain solutions. And account abstraction came up, and rollups came about, and I think as a community, we accepted this hybrid model to create better user experience, better security, and I think that really paved the way to not only do have a lot more automation in the wallets through session keys or smart contract accounts, but actually in some ways, I think kind of being open to this hybrid on-off chain mantra helped us facilitate a lot of them in a more secure way. A very, very high level area, but at least that's kind of the high level principle that we at Magic adopt, which is how do you create, in some ways, a hybrid on-off chain solution to create the best user experience and best security. And I think overall through that, I think next year, a lot of the products adopting that philosophy is going to really pave the way for chain abstraction.
What do you mean by like on-off chain infra? Are you only talking about the bundler and paymaster stuff that happens
exactly
off chain?
Right. Right. Yeah. For example, user ops and bundlers. These are all in some ways off-chain constructs, and I think that really opened up for us to create more secure ways of doing cross-chain interactions. And yeah, I think that's just kind of a high-level philosophical point that I think is just worth touching.
There's another like on-off chain thing that happens, which is you can either have these policies or constraints on the smart contract account itself, be it via modules or some other things, or you can have like a TEE which has the signing key, which has some off-chain logic, which verifies if what the user is trying to do is valid or not. And for example, a lot of SSO logins that happen use this off-chain component logic because you cannot verify SSO OAuth tokens on-chain, basically. What are your opinions on that? And why? I've seen a lot of apps basically switching to SSO, even at the cost of giving away on-chain policy verification. And what are your thoughts on this transition?
Yeah, actually, for the SSO, maybe I'll just share kind of like from the context of Magic. Actually, can you clarify exactly what do you mean by the SSO piece?
So, like if you try to do Google login, what happens is the app gets some OAuth token from Gmail, and then this OAuth token is sent to like whatever backend, what is the signing service that verifies if the OAuth token actually belongs to this particular private key, and then it signs that transaction. And all this thing happens off-chain because it cannot happen on-chain. And so, other than even the paymaster and bundler stuff, we are also seeing this rise of off-chain computation in the policy engines. And how does that impact all the conversations we are having?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the highest level, it just unlocks new use cases that were a lot more frictionful. I mean, the most primitive use case, at least from wallet perspective, that we always seen was how do you create a key management experience where that can be connected to any of the existing auths? So I think, at least from speaking from a wallet-centric standpoint, one of the most pertinent use cases were when existing enterprises like the Fortune 500s or existing tech companies that had a lot of existing user base with existing login systems. For them, introducing on-chain components is a different ballgame than building for kind of the degen community. And one example could be Naver Financial. So Naver is kind of the Google of Korea. I think the Korea's population is 50 million, and they have 40 million daily active users. And they rolled out a blockchain wallet pretty quietly using our TE key management system. So what the way it worked was the Naver users could log in using their existing login method, but through the OIDC token connection, we were able to create a key in the backend, and every signing transaction happened on the TE environment. Everything was off-chain in a secure environment, but essentially what this enabled was users were able to kind of create and interact with the chain as if they're interacting with the existing app. So it's one use case where kind of leveraging these off-chain primitives can help reduce the UX hurdle for a lot of the normies, and that really brings more people on chain. I think that I think that was kind of the use case. At least we've applied that.
I was just going to add, with the balance between having on-chain and off-chain policies, I'm definitely like an on-chain maxi. It's just like, our DNA at Rhinestone is smart accounts. But that's not always the best approach. And I think where off-chain can be really nice is writing things on-chain in smart contracts is not very expressive and somewhat limiting. And so being able to move these policies to an off-chain service can allow you to have more expressiveness in the scope that you can give to that service. But then coupling it with on-chain policies can also be really nice, because you can have on-chain verifiable policies that are like guardrails. So it could be just like a spending limit, but then you have finer policy or more dynamic policies that are kind of pushed off-chain to some external service. And I think that's where decentralized MPC networks like the AVS and Eigenlayer is really interesting, and TE is also super interesting.
Got it. I would like to switch gears to chain abstraction. We have talked a lot about account abstraction right now. But before doing that, does anyone in the audience have a question about account abstraction? Maybe just one question before we move forward. No one? Oh yeah, there's one question.
Thank you. With account abstraction, the transaction fee payment often is moved to a paymaster or some other entity. What do you think is the importance of taking into account the amount of transaction fees that are paid? And are there any approaches that could lower the overall cost to make the business practices more sustainable?
Maybe Daniel, you want to take that?
Yeah, probably. I think there's a significant chance in routing transactions intelligently to bundlers that are kind of the economy service with transactions with a kind of a time horizon, and those who are urgent. So if you manage to do that, have different streams of transactions, you could use potentially our technology to route those bundle transactions intelligently, and even offer lower prices for the paymaster's take on that. So I think that is a chance for us to shine in this environment, in this new environment, where actually the user-facing transactions are getting really cheap, and the transaction cost and the rental of the block space, block storage, is getting shifted towards the services supplying all these applications, or providing all these applications. So this could be an option here.
We'll take the other questions at the end of the panel. We've heard a lot about chain abstraction, especially in the crypto Twitter space in the last 3 to 6 months. I actually want to validate it. Is it something that users and app developers actually want, or is it just people talking over each other on crypto Twitter? Like you guys interface a lot with dApp developers, you guys interface a lot with apps. I want to understand, like, have you actually received people saying, we want this yesterday?
Yeah, I think this is a good question as well, because like, to be honest, whenever you hear chain abstraction, 99% of it is noise, and most people that are saying that they're doing chain abstraction are bullshitting for the most part. I think it's people don't have a very clear consensus on what is chain abstraction. A lot of it is conflated with cross-chain very commonly, and it's a very muddy space at the moment. And so I think that it's a lot of it's driven by hype and people that want a narrative to latch on to, and they want something interesting to talk about. And so this is how it's been. You know, we first kind of started pushing the chain abstraction narrative over a year ago, and Frontier was one of the first ones to really help bring that narrative to the forefront with the Cake framework and whatnot. And so since then, and really since Chain Abstraction Day in Denver, that the whole narrative has blown up to the point where I think it has become a big buzzword in the space. But I think whenever you tell developers and users even like what chain abstraction actually is, and you actually let them try this type of experience, albeit there are a few demos that actually represent chain abstraction in whole, but there are a few like the OneBalance demo, for example, and universal accounts and many others. When they actually try this, developers and users alike, it's a sort of, what I found at least, like a light bulb moment. It's like, okay, I understand the experience that we're trying to go for here. Like I see why this is important for me. And I think as people start to ship, you know, most people are going to actually get to experience this, including everybody in the audience. Eventually, you're going to try some sort of chain abstracted product. The degree of improvement that it has over the existing user experience is insane. It's shocking whenever you get to try it. It's a 180 over how Web3 currently works today in terms of how you interact with things. I mean, you know, we use this term on Twitter a lot, which is just use apps. It's like, you know, some copy pasta thing, but it really does, like, with chain abstraction, you literally can go to whatever application you want and you just use it. There's no, oh, this is a base application, this is a Solana application, or this is an Optimism application or whatever. You just go to it and you do a transaction and it's that. There's no necessity to think about that third degree, which is the blockchain. And so for the developers that we've talked to specifically, like beyond just the users, this is an almost objectively beneficial thing from an incentive standpoint. Because right now, if I build an application, I deploy it on Base, and it's a Base application, my competition is mostly apps on Base, and my user base is mostly users on Base. There's very few applications where people will actually bridge or on-ramp over into the chain that I've deployed on to use it, like maybe Polymarket or Pump.Fun are one of the very few examples of this. Otherwise, I'm kind of stuck with the users that are on the chain already that I've deployed on. And so when I'm deploying an application as a developer, I have two options. I either build really aggressively for one ecosystem and hope that's enough to get a product market fit, like a revenue generating application, or I deploy across 10, 20, 30 different blockchains, and now I'm fragmented and my application is like, I can't address all these chains equally, and it's a mess. And so with chain abstraction, what you're gonna be able to do is deploy wherever you want. An app chain, you can deploy on Solana, you can deploy on Base, whatever. And your addressable market is the entire Web3 ecosystem. It's all users in Web3. It's not only the users on the chain that you deploy on. It's all users that have funds on chain. And so that, from an incentive standpoint, changed a lot about you know, where I choose to deploy. I'll now deploy on chains that make more sense technologically rather than just chains that have users. And it'll allow me as a developer to capture more revenue, because the game now comes down to, can I build a better app that will generate mindshare? And there's no limitations to that because there's no barriers between chains. And so I think that it's a pretty unanimous positive reception that we've seen from the ecosystem.
Got it. So when we define chain abstraction, we said there are like two things that you want. One is being able to tap into balances spread across different chains, and the second is syncing auth across all chains. Let's just take a moment to discuss the balance piece. There is this like debate on Twitter that I saw a couple of days ago, which is like, what is the eventual end state? I want your guys, like, what do you see as the future? One is that users will only use like one in, one out type of balance transfers, or would users use like n in, one out? So to define the question more properly, is it, if a user wants to spend $100 on Base, would they only use $100 from Optimism, or they will use 30 from Optimism, 40 from Base, 50 from somewhere else? What does the future look like 6 months, 1 year from now?
I find that question particularly interesting because what I've seen I think it came to me last ECC when the shared sequencing came up or was discussed widely. I found that chance to be real, to become real. Like if sequencers work together so that they have an atomic state change together, that allows for the n in, one out transfer. And I think we are getting there. And I think the shared sequencing thing is going to be realized within the next 6 months. I think we're going to see that, at least experimentally.
Yeah, I think you're referencing the tweet from Paradigm about it was 1 in 1 out, n in 1 out, or it was n in m
Multiple out, yeah.
Right. So I think that the third case is a little bit of an edge case that I don't see being very common, but I think that, to be honest, I wouldn't consider 1 in 1 out to be actual chain abstraction. Technically, it would fit within the definition of chain abstraction, if you want to call it that, but I think that if that's a limitation of the capability, then that's not true chain abstraction, because to be 1 in 1 out, there is still a requirement of cognitive perception of the chains that you're using to some degree, right? Because I need to know that I'm buying something with tokens that I have on Ethereum or with tokens that I have here and here, right? When you have n in 1 out, this is much more akin to the chain abstraction experience. What this would refer to is I have tokens on Base, Polygon, and Arbitrum, and I want to use these collectively to buy an NFT on Ethereum or on X chain, right? And so I think that is actually the only real approach to chain abstraction. And that's how it should materialize. I think 1 in 1 out is, we've had this forever. This has been the continual thing that we've been pushing as an ecosystem to make that more efficient, like across, for example, and having very quick cross-chain swaps and whatnot. I think this is fine. But the goal for chain abstraction is beyond just optimized cross-chain. This is, I think, too limiting for that definition. So I think n in 1 out really is the future that we should go for. But I think it's rare because, like I said earlier, there's very few implementations that actually can do n in 1 out right now. I think OneBalance, Particle, Arcana, and ZeroDev are maybe the only ones that can do that at the moment. And so it's much harder than 1 in 1 out. But I think this is the ideal end state.
I think the tougher part is n token-ins, right? Like if you have some array of shit tokens and you want to spend USDC on some target chain, that's when it starts getting really complex. I think like the n chains to one chain is maybe, I think like you mentioned, we're kind of already there with existing implementations. Because with the n tokens, like solvers have to support that, and how many solvers out there actually support hold liquidity in those tokens or want to take on the pricing risk? And I haven't seen a real solution for that yet.
Yeah, you're right. This is a major problem at the moment, which is how do you manage long tail assets with chain abstraction and with intents and stuff like that. The way that we've looked at it, and it's not a perfect solution, but we maintain liquidity in one token denomination, which is USDC. And then if you want to use some long tail asset, you can swap between that and USDC to move things across chains. But the only risk you have there is pricing risk and
yeah, do you do the swap first, or does the solver take the risk?
Exactly. Yeah. So essentially, if we can use the example of, let's say I have a GOAT token on Solana and I want to buy an NFT on Polygon with $10 of GOAT token, right? Well, of course, the solver is not going to maintain a liquidity pool of GOAT token because this just doesn't make sense. And so what they would have to do first is then say, okay, well, I'm going to swap that to USDC. That's what I'm getting repaid in on Solana, and I'm fronting the liquidity for whatever the destination token is to buy that NFT. And this is fine, but again, you have the issue of, because these are volatile assets, what if you don't get repaid all the way? And so there's a lot of problems that are attached to this type of approach. But I think that, again, I think this is also a temporary issue that is probably somebody will address it eventually. But, we're going to release, we haven't made the announcement yet, but we're going to release an application.
Do it right now.
Yeah, do it. We haven't said anything about it on Twitter or anything like that, but next week we're going to be releasing basically the first implementation of universal accounts. And it's on mainnet. It's like an actual application. You can download it on the App Store. You can go to the website. You can use it. And it's essentially the ability to buy and sell tokens on any chain, any token, even shitcoins you can buy, including Solana, without bridging. And it's n in 1 out. That's how it works. And so you can have any token that you want on any EVM chain, Solana, whatever, and then buy a token on any chain with those balances collectively, pay gas on whatever token that you want. And from all of our internal testing, and if you find me at any of these events, I can give you access to it, it works pretty well, actually. There's not a huge, like, so far we haven't really ran into many pricing problems. Right now it's just one solver, so there's not, like, we take on most of that risk, but it's,
And you guys are the solver?
yeah, right now it's just Particle as a solver. Eventually we'll decentralize it, but there's a path to decentralize that, but in the current, like, POC, it's pretty incredible. I mean, you can buy, like, we can do the inverse. I buy Goat token, and I have funds on Polygon, Arbitrum, Base, and Avalanche, and it's all USDC, and it's fragmented across these 4 chains, one signature, and I bought that token on Solana. I don't even know that I don't even know that bridging is happening. I'm just buying the token as if I were buying it on Binance. So it is effectively decentralized exchange experience on chain, and so there's so much just incredible work being done over here, and we're very excited to start pushing this forward from our side as well.
Okay, coming back to this, like, syncing of cross-chain auth question. So suppose you have one smart contract account or a multi-sig account on multiple chains, and you just change the signer on one chain. How do you basically make sure that the same signer is synced across all the chains? I've seen, like, a bunch of different solutions. There's a key store rollup. There's also, like, a relay solution. What does the panel think is the correct end state that we'll land in? Maybe we start with Sung.
I actually don't have a strong opinion on this one.
Okay. So let's start from this side.
Yeah, I mean, the key store concept makes a lot of sense in terms of having a source of truth that can be trustless, and you can get this synchronous state sync. You can get state sync of your keys across many different chains. I think it's just Scroll and Coinbase that are currently working on an implementation of that. And to be honest, I'm not fully up to date with how they're tracking. We at Rhinestone, we're starting to speak to some partners that could help provide a stopgap and maybe a slightly more trusted way to do this. But essentially, you need some source of truth that is this is the key that is relevant to this account on this chain. And then you need some trusted intermediary that can essentially relay what you mentioned. And so I believe the way Coinbase does this solution at the moment for the Coinbase Smart Wallet is that there's a relay system. And I guess maybe to highlight why this is important for chain abstraction is if you have a solver front liquidity on a target chain, one attack vector from the user, so here the user is being malicious, is that they actually switch out the signer, desync on purpose, so that when the solver comes to make a claim, the signature is no longer valid. So solving this problem, it can be done in multiple ways. It can be done through having a very specific validator that doesn't allow the keys to be changed when an intent is in flow. But yeah, so I'm not sure how far off these key store solutions are. My expectation is we're 6 months to 12 months away, and so I think we do need a short-term solution that just achieves this synchronization, but potentially with a bit more trust involved.
I think we are 2 minutes away. I'll just open up the floor for questions. But before that, do you guys have any closing remarks?
Maybe a take on what it takes. So I think user experience problems boil down to 3.5 problems to me. It's the bootstrapping, how to get the user to make a transaction without having base currency. Second would be recovery. You must not lose access. You have to be able to recover with something that you cannot lose. And third would be cross-chain balance management, what we just discussed. And the half problem is access itself. What is Privy, for instance, solving already really great, or passkeys are used for currently. And I think it's great to see these things coming together now. I think we're almost there.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're always 2 months away from a UX revolution or whatever, but I do think that going into next year, there's a lot of things that are materializing that have been kind of half-baked for a long time. I think chain abstraction, especially with things like 7702 and whatnot that are coming to the forefront, is going to be amazing. I think chain abstraction, we're getting to the point now where, again, still chain abstraction is materializing and it's still being worked on. It is not something that you can go and really use today in a large capacity. There's very few protocols that have actually achieved it. But I think over the next 3-4 months, it's going to be the standard experience. I think by the end of next year, every new user is just going to have a chain abstraction experience, and that's going to be it. It's going to be implemented in large wallets, things of this nature. And so I think that we are, we're moving towards a much more user-centric future with all of these, UX improvements, and I'm really excited for it. And of course, I'm very glad to kind of be on the forefront of that.
Yeah, I think maybe last thing I would add is I think if there's a moment where we start celebrating another L2, I think that's when we can confidently say chain abstraction has been achieved. But we'll see where we are next year.
Questions? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, actually, like the question relevant to what was said about L2. So there is like a big topic about interoperability now, and like I feel like it's kind of moving the same direction with the chain abstraction, right? So my question is that where do you think is like this balance between the efforts from the blockchain, like the L2s or L1s, and like from the like a protocols or projects working on the chain abstraction? So what's the kind of split between these, or like do you think it should be completely done by the blockchain itself?
Yeah, I can maybe take it briefly, and maybe I'm curious to hear the rest of the panel's thought. But I think the way I understood it is like, hey, if you're building a specific purpose chain, do they have to care about this chain abstraction and interoperability across other protocols? And I think the answer is no. However, for solutions building for chain abstraction, whether they're on the UI UX layer, like on where Magic sits, which is on the wallet side, or is it happening all the way down the settlement layer? I think the players in the stack would definitely have to think about how do you enable that chain abstraction experience. But I think that the whole goal for that is if you're building something, you don't have to really think about this cross-chain interoperability because there's going to be solutions around it.
Yep, the man in gray.
Yeah, so my question is more towards the future of like all the L2s and when we, let's say, achieved chain abstraction. I wanted to know your thoughts like, let's say chain abstraction is already here and we have so many L2s now and they spend so much funding to attract users onto that chain. And right now the friction to move between chain is very high. So the revenue model makes sense for them because they know if users are there, they're going to stay at least for a while. But once the chain abstraction is there, the friction would reduce to like very less. So the amount of funding they spend to attract users would not make sense for a revenue model they have now. So just wanted to know your thoughts how the landscape would change. Would it disincentivize L2 people to launch their own chains, or they'd probably be becoming like an app chain in itself?
This is a great question, and there's been a lot of debate about this. There's a podcast clip that I was talking about this, and it was posted, and some of the public chains don't like chain abstraction always because of that property. The fact that users don't explicitly know that they're connecting to these different chains. Why would chains market to end users now if they don't even know, right? And so, but the caveat here, and what I've heard, I've talked to Solana, and I've talked to Berachain, all these guys that are large chains, and the kind of common denominator is that yes, users are going to be agnostic to the chain that they're using. They're not going to know what chains they're using, but chains still have vibes or whatever for developers.
Tokens.
And so chains are going to, I think they're going to divert most of their resources towards onboarding developers, towards getting developer attention, because at this point it just comes down to a game of can you get people to build on your chain, and if you can, then you'll attract users. You won't attract users directly because you're, doing some conference or doing some fancy videos, but you're going to attract users through the means of attracting developers to deploy strong applications on your platform, on your blockchain. And so I don't think for chains it's going to change that much other than the fact that they're going to be more in the background and less in your face. And so I think this is actually a good thing, whether or not some of them will agree or not agree with this. I think it allows for developers and for chains, honestly, to compete based on what really matters, which is technology and what affects applications.
I think if you start viewing chains as servers with interesting properties, it all starts to make a lot of sense. Like users will just care about the applications. They won't care if it's AWS or Google or whatever's under the hood supporting the application. And so it's just products all the way through. Build great products, and that's what attracts users.
One final question. No? Okay.
Thank you. I'm debating which one to ask, to be honest, but Yeah, let's go with the token one. So when we say that, yeah, we will now aggregate all the balances and then spend from the shared balances of, let's say, USDC, we by default assume that there is a source of truth of which balances to aggregate for this USDC, right? And then for USDC itself, it's probably fine, though we have a lot of bridged versions of USDC around the world, right? So I wonder how you guys think about, yeah, who, how, and then we'll define this, fungible to each other versions of the token across multiple blockchains.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge issue. Today, if you go and connect a wallet to an application, and it makes an RPC call to check the balance of the wallet, that RPC checks the balance on that chain. It doesn't check the state of that user across every chain. And so that's the first problem, like how do you get that data availability? And then yeah, in terms of supporting the long tail of assets, let's say you're using an escrow to chain abstract a balance, you're probably wrapping that token. Like, how does that RPC get visibility over that wrap token? What is the trusted price oracle for that wrap token? There's a ton of complexity that needs to be solved there. And I think that's why a lot of the teams today are focused on embedded wallets where you can place a lot of control over these environments. And the list of tokens that are actually being chain abstracted are very, very short. It's USDC, it's ETH, it's a couple of other, I mean, it sounds like you guys are going a lot further than that, but when you look at most of the products, the list of tokens is very small for that reason.
Good? I was just going to say, I think that's about it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.